Hi, Humanities 100 and 200 students, and welcome to the last video tutorial of the term. I'm combining it here for both classes because as you both start to wrap up your weekly work and some of the larger assignments in your courses, this is one of those big questions that's sort of rolling around in all of the work that you're doing in these weeks, and that is to be thinking about the value of the humanities and the arts in the contemporary world, in the world that we live in. And one way to think about this idea is to consider sort of recent issues and sort of the ongoing debate of sorts between the world of the arts and the humanities and the world of science and math. You can think about this, how it happens in the schools, where there's this sort of a back and forth between what is more important or most important to teach children in K through 12. We can consider it throughout college as well, and we can also consider it in our everyday lives. And in some ways, there's this sense of having to make a case for the arts or making an argument for why the arts are important in our lives or how they can connect to our lives in other parts of our lives and if we are in other professions. So some ideas to think about when you make a case for the arts is to consider how they can help us or how they can benefit us. So we can think about the humanities and the arts as helping us to learn from our past when we are able to look back at artifacts and ideas that have come before us. It can help us to understand the way people lived in the past. It can help us to improve upon life in the past. It can help us to avoid past mistakes and so forth. The humanities can help us to think creatively and critically in order to solve problems, so we can sort of get out of just that straightforward black and white mindset of scientific thinking and bring a different approach to problems and issues that might arise and help us to potentially solve those problems in a more creative way, perhaps. They can help us to understand other cultures, and this is particularly important as we consider how increasingly global we're becoming. All of our day-to-day activities are so much more intimately linked with other parts of the world and other cultures in the world. Think about how quickly information can travel now. There's this idea of instant information. So as the world becomes smaller in that way, it's important for us to consider how we can learn about one another and understand one another better through something like the arts and the humanities that can have a more universal approach or appeal. The arts can also help us maintain a voice of dissent. So if we think about the different artists throughout time who have sort of fought against the status quo or have challenged some ideas that may have happened that they didn't agree with, it's another way of expressing that voice of dissent. So we can use the arts and use the creative way of thinking to challenge that status quo when it's necessary, when it's needed. That idea of the freedom of our voice, the freedom of speech and expression. And then, of course, there's always the case for the arts in that they maintain our personal and social well-being. If you can imagine a world without the arts, without the humanities, you'd have to imagine a world without movies, without television, without novels, without these kinds of ways that we entertain ourselves as well as ways that we sort of nourish ourselves. And we can find ourselves escaping in a certain kind of artwork or relaxing or unwinding with something that we enjoy. If we didn't have these parts in our lives, our personal and social well-being might not be quite so well off. And then some questions to ask yourself as you consider your final projects and your final ideas in the course, as well as beyond the course, is to ask yourself, how have the arts and the humanities affected and served us in various ways? For example, how have they affected and served us in terms of technology? What are some advancements in technology that might not have been possible without artistic and creative thought? How have they affected and served us as far as politics go? Again, if we think back to that idea of arts allowing us to have a voice of dissent. How have they served us in terms of religion, whether it's to promote or bring a certain religion closer to us or to have us ask questions about different kinds of religion and faith? How they serve us in terms of gender, ethics, race, economics, commerce, communication, how they affected and served those who have special needs, or the ways that we might work with and help those who have special needs. Education. We've talked a lot about how the arts and humanities can help us to learn concepts and ideas in a different way. For some of us, it can be very, very useful to have an artistic approach or a creative approach to learning something that might not otherwise appear to be creative or artistic. How have they helped to affect and serve us in terms of medicine and health? What kind of connections have we discovered over the years that might connect the arts with this field? What about in terms of power? Think about the various ways we've seen artists and creators of artifacts use their works to either bring about power or to respond to power. And then you want to ask yourself, how will they continue to do so? So as we're thinking about this sort of takeaway idea in terms of the value of the humanities and the arts in our world today, we can also think about the value in the humanities that they will continue to have and hold in the future.